morning. My name is Rebecca Sibanda. I am the Legal Officer at the Centre for Constitutional Rights. Today I'll be chatting with Chris Hattingh, and he is from the Free Market Foundation, and we're going to just have a bit of a chat on property rights in South Africa. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
So my first question to you is whether you think that a full and holistic access to property rights is bigger than just the legal framework we have in South Africa.
So I think it's always important to keep in mind the philosophical framework from which you're working. Things aren't just confined to the legal space. You always come, like all of us, I come from the free market perspective, some people come from the communist, the socialist perspective. We all have our own ideology, so we come with our own ideas of where these things are located, so I think that's important to keep in mind. Property rights, I think, are vital for all people around the world. It's not just a case of a Western justice sort of concept of democracy, constitutionalism, that sort of thing, whether it's communal rights, whether it's communal ownership property, whether it's individual rights, as I might be more used to. I think all of these deserve equal footing if you have the framework of each person ought to have the right to own his or her body, his or her own mind, use them as they see fit, use them in the ways that they want to improve their own lives. I think if you keep that in mind, you'll always keep the importance of property rights at the top of your head.
Okay, I think something else you said earlier really stuck with me, that you can't really be secure in your own personhood if you don't own your own property.
Yeah.
So that's something I'll take away. What is your opinion on the wave of populism that has taken place, particularly in relation to property rights in South Africa?
So we know, I want to couch this with the context of the land issue and the land question being very emotionally charged in South Africa. Given South Africa's history of apartheid and colonialism and dispossession, the government coming in and taking people's land, which they owned rightfully in their own concept of law and what is legal.
Absolutely.
They owned it for themselves and their own communities. We might not have recognized it as white people coming from Europe, that sort of perspective. So I want to make clear that you always need to keep in mind these different perspectives, these different views. On the question of populism, I think students and young people especially are taught a lot and told that the government will be there to provide for them, to give them things. Before elections, we see different parties promising people more and more things. It seems to be that seems to be the trend nowadays. It's not parties really competing on principle anymore. It's just competing on what they can give us. And then when people aren't given land, for example, or a house, they act upset, rightfully so. I think they're told and they're promised, vote for us, we'll give you something, we'll be there for you, and then they're not, and then the state is not there for them. This is not about any particular political party, this is just the state and its own inefficiencies. So I think the rise in populism is to be expected. I don't think it should come as a surprise. I think we should go back to a view of the state should be very limited in its role in people's lives. We shouldn't always rely on it to do everything for us. This is, of course, not to say that the private sector will solve every problem under the sun. It should be maybe a back and forth, a more open discussion, more engagement, but I think definitely the focus should be on individual rights, individual self-ownership.
Okay. So finally, what is your vision, or what do you hope for the regular South African on the ground in terms of property rights going forward?
I think, and based on the conversation we had today, that government engages more with civil society and the private sector, that there's an ongoing discussion back and forth. I hope that property rights, whether they are individual, whether they're communal, that they're recognized more strongly. I very strongly hope that expropriation without compensation doesn't happen, because I don't think it'll solve any of our very real problems, which ought to be addressed. Restitution must happen. These land questions, the land emotion must be addressed and heard. People should not just be told, okay, we're having these parliamentary hearings or we're having these discussions, we're ticking boxes and move along now. No, we're pushing you away. There should be actual
engagement
moves going
with
forward.
that.
Yes, correct. There should be actionable plans going forward. I hope that property rights are entrenched in South Africa going forward. When one looks at the history of economic growth in the world and economic freedom, countries with more property rights tend to do better, economically speaking. South Africa, if we are to have real economic growth, we ought to have strong property rights, and I hope that's the future of South Africa.
Okay, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you.